The show was following the script. It was a standard Monday night, the kind of evening that blends into history without leaving a scar. The wrestling ring, a bright canvas under harsh LED lights, was occupied by two superstars going through the motions of a mid-card match. The crowd was polite. They clapped at the high spots and checked their phones during the rest holds. The commentary team spoke in their usual rhythm, selling the drama, discussing upcoming pay-per-views, and laughing at inside jokes. Order was absolute. The machine was running perfectly. But then the air changed. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a feeling. A sudden drop in atmospheric pressure that pricked the skin of 20,000 people simultaneously. The visuals on the giant Titantron flickered not a glitch, but a hesitation. The stickman figure of the referee in the ring paused, his hand hovering mid-count, looking toward the entrance ramp not with confusion but with instinctual dread. The music playing for the match distorted, slowing down into a low, guttural hum that vibrated the floorboards. For a minimalist animation, picture the crowd as a sea of static dots, suddenly freezing in place. The noise of the arena died down, replaced by a confused murmur that sounded like rushing water. This is the moment before the car crash, split second before the lightning strikes. The producers in the back hadn't cut the feed yet because they didn't understand what was happening. They thought it was a technical error. They didn't realize that the narrative they had carefully constructed for months was about to be shattered by a ghost from the past. The static grew louder. The lights died completely. In that total darkness, the heartbeat of the arena stopped. When the lights returned, they didn't flood the arena. They focused on a single point at the top of the ramp. A silhouette stood there, just a shadow against the smoke. But the posture was unmistakable. The way the head tilted, the specific cadence of the stance, it communicated a history of violence and glory that needed no introduction. The music hit. It wasn't a remix or a modern update. It was her theme, the original sound that defined a golden era. The reaction wasn't a cheer. It was a physical shockwave. You can animate the crowd as a wave of force pushing outward. People didn't just stand, they surged. The carefully placed security guards, represented by rigid block figures, were instantly overwhelmed. This wasn't a planned fan interaction. This was a loss of control. The barricade, usually the ironclad border between the performers and the observers, bent under the weight of thousands of bodies trying to get closer to the miracle. The camera operators, usually steady and invisible, were jostled. The shot shook violently, zooming in and out of focus, catching only glimpses of her walking down the ramp. She moved slowly, deliberately, ignoring the chaos erupting on either side of her. She was the eye of the hurricane. A fan leaped the rail, only to be tackled, but the cameras didn't cut away because the director was too stunned to switch feeds. This is the texture of reality breaking. It wasn't a wrestling show anymore. It was a riot of emotion. The commentary team went silent. There were no catchphrases to sell this. There was only the deafening roar of a crowd that had waited years for a moment they were told would never happen. She was here, and the script was gone. Cut to the backstage area. In our minimalist style, this is represented by a chaotic arrangement of headsets, clipboards, and monitors. The gorilla position, the nerve center of the show, was in absolute meltdown. Usually this area is a place of military precision. Times are shouted, cues are given, and authority is absolute. But in this moment, the headset chatter was a cacophony of panic. Producers were screaming for security. Writers were frantically flipping through pages of scripts that were now worthless. "Cut her mic," someone shouted. "Don't you dare," another voice countered. The showrunner, the person responsible for the flow of time on television, stood paralyzed. They watched the monitors as the woman in the ring picked up a microphone, while every planned segment for the next hour was dissolving. The commercial breaks were delayed. The advertisers would be furious, but nobody cared about the sponsors right now. The hierarchy of power had shifted. The person with the microphone now controlled the timeline. This section highlights the fragility of the machine. We often think of major wrestling companies as unshakable corporations, but they are run by humans who fear the unknown. This return wasn't on the run sheet. It wasn't in the email threads. It was a rogue variable. The animation should show script pages filled with dialogue and match time slowly falling to the floor, landing in a puddle of spilled coffee. It symbolizes the death of the plan. The writers, usually the architects of destiny, were now just spectators like everyone else. They watched the screen, terrified and mesmerized, waiting to see what she would say. knowing that whatever words left her mouth would force them to rewrite the entire future of the company before the night was over. Deeper backstage in the locker room, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't panic. It was a mixture of awe and fear. Animate the roster as a group of distinct figures huddled around a small monitor. These are the current stars, the champions, the ones who believed they were sitting at the top of the mountain. For years, they had built their reputations in her absence. They had claimed her spot. They had told the fans that the new era was better. But as they watched her walk the ring ropes, they felt the ground shrink beneath them. The veterans nodded in respect, knowing the war was about to restart. The younger talent, who had only seen her on old tapes, felt a cold shiver of intimidation. They realized that their screen time was about to evaporate. The queen had returned to the hive, and the hierarchy was instinctively rearranging itself. There is a specific kind of professional jealousy that exists in wrestling. It isn't malicious. It is survival. Every minute she is on screen is a minute someone else is not. The animation should focus on a championship belt sitting on a bench. Looks heavy, shiny, and important. But as the crowd noise from the television swells, the belt seems to lose its luster. It becomes just a prop. The real power is out there in the ring. A figure stands up from the bench, wrapping their wrists with tape, tighter and tighter. They aren't preparing for a scheduled match anymore. They are preparing to defend their relevance. The locker room, usually a place of camaraderie or petty squabbles, united in a singular realization. The standard had just been raised, and half of them weren't tall enough to reach it anymore. Why did the barricade break? Why did the security fail? It wasn't because of violence, it was because of love. To understand the chaos, we have to visualize the invisible threads connecting the figure in the ring to the thousands in the stands. In a minimalist style, draw a glowing line from the heart of the wrestler to the hearts of the fans. When she left years ago, she didn't just retire, she vanished. She left a void. Fans had invested their childhoods, their teenage years, and their emotional stability in her journey. When she disappeared, those threads snapped, leaving raw nerves. Tonight, those nerves were reconnected all at once. The reaction wasn't just about wrestling, it was about nostalgia. It was about seeing a friend who you thought was dead. The woman in the front row, crying with her hands over her mouth, wasn't thinking about win-loss records. She was remembering who she was 5 years ago. She was remembering the struggles she endured while watching this hero endure hers. The chaos was a release of grief. The reason the show fell apart is that raw human emotion is impossible to script. You can script a cheer, you can script a boo, cannot script a mass catharsis. The sound in the arena was a mixture of joy and agony. It was the sound of closure. The animation should slow down here, show the faces of the crowd simple, stickman faces transforming from static expressions to overwhelmed tears. This was the dangerous power of the return. It reminded everyone that despite the pyrotechnics and the branding, this industry is built entirely on the fragile beating hearts of the people watching. And tonight, those hearts were beating too fast for the security guards to manage. Inside the ring, the dynamic was hypnotic. She stood in the center. The music had stopped. The crowd was still screaming, a wall of white noise that made communication impossible. But she didn't speak. She just looked. She looked at the hard cam. She looked at the turnbuckles. She looked at her hands. In storytelling, silence is the loudest weapon. By not speaking, she forced the audience to project their own feelings onto her. Was she happy? Was she angry? Was she regretful? The ambiguity created tension. The current champion, who had been in the ring when the interruption happened, stood in the corner. Animate the champion as shrinking slightly, their confident posture dissolving into uncertainty.
Right.
They were now a guest in their own segment. She walked slowly toward the champion. No strikes were thrown. No insults were hurled. She simply extended a hand and touched the championship title resting on the other wrestler's shoulder. Just a touch. The crowd gasped a sharp intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. That touch said more than a 20-minute promo. It said, I built this house. It said, you are only renting this spot. The emotional weight of that simple gesture caused the cameras to zoom in so tight you could see the grain of the film. It was intimate. It was uncomfortable. It felt like watching a private family dispute spill out onto a global stage. The chaos of the fans faded into the background, replaced by the suffocating pressure of two generations colliding in a 20 by minus 20-foot square. While the arena was locked in a trance, the world outside was burning. The internet creates a different kind of chaos, one that moves faster than light. The moment her boot hit the stage, the social media platforms crashed. Not figuratively, literally. The volume of posts, the hashtags, the grainy screenshots uploaded in real time overwhelmed the servers. The trending topics were dominated by her name. Animate this as a map of the world. Small lights begin to pop up, representing conversations. First a few, then thousands, then millions, until the entire map is glowing white. And news outlets that never cover wrestling sports channels, pop culture blogs, financial tickers began running the headline. She is back. The stock price of the company actually spiked in after-hours trading. This is the magnitude of the star power involved. But amidst the hype, there was confusion. Why now? Why her? The dirt sheets and insiders were scrambling, their exclusive sources having failed them completely. Nobody knew this was coming. Surprise was genuine, which is the rarest commodity in the information age. This digital wildfire added pressure to the live broadcast. The executives knew that millions of people were tuning in remotely, switching channels, waking up friends, frantically finding a stream. The viewership numbers were climbing vertically. The graph line shot up, breaking the scale. This forced the production truck to make a choice. Do we cut to commercial and risk losing them? Or do we stay with this unscripted madness and ride the wave? They chose the madness. They stayed on the shot, letting the world watch the internet break in real time along with the show. High above the ring, in the luxury boxes, the real owners of the company watched. These are the suits. The people who care about quarterly earnings and brand safety, usually a fan riot and a broken script, are their nightmares. They are liabilities, insurance risks. But tonight, they watched the chaos with dollar signs in their eyes. However, there was a problem. The merchandise stands were empty. They hadn't printed shirts, hadn't prepared the marketing assets. They were losing money by not being ready. Animate a frantic montage of warehouse workers being called in at midnight, printers firing up, graphic designers frantically photoshopping new banners. The corporate machine was trying to catch up to the lightning bolt it had just caught. This section explores the cynicism of the business colliding with the art. The emotional moment in the ring was pure, but the machine immediately tried to commodify it. They wanted to package the chaos. They wanted to sell the loss of control. But they couldn't control her. She hadn't signed the contract yet. She hadn't agreed to the dates. She had just walked out. The executives realized with horror that they had no leverage. She held all the cards. If she walked out the back door right now, the stock would crash tomorrow. They were hostages to her popularity. The power dynamic had fully inverted. The billion-dollar corporation was at the mercy of one woman with a microphone and a history, and they were scrambling to build a golden cage fast enough to keep her. The show ended. The cameras cut to black. The copyright logo flashed, but in the arena, nobody left. For an hour after the broadcast concluded, the fans remained in their seats. They were exhausted, voiceless, and drained, but they refused to break the spell. They stared at the empty ring, hoping she would come back out. The custodial staff, animated as slow-moving figures with brooms, began to sweep up the debris. The popcorn, the torn signs, the broken pieces of the barricade. It looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster. The silence that fell over the building was heavy. It was the silence of a place that had witnessed history. Backstage, the superstar had vanished. She didn't do post-show interviews. She didn't celebrate with the roster. She packed her bag and left before the traffic started. This deepened the mystery. Was it a one-time thing? Was she back for good? The ambiguity was suffocating. The commentary team sat at their desk, headsets off, staring at each other. They had no words left. They knew that next week everything would be different. The storylines they had been building were dead. The hierarchy was broken. The world had shifted on its axis, and the silence of the empty arena was the only sound that made sense. It was a moment of reflection, a realization that the simulated combat they loved had just touched something dangerously real. But here's the truth about that night. The twist isn't that she stayed, or that she won the title. The twist is found in the eyes of the fans as they walk to their cars. Throughout the script, we assumed the loss of control was a bad thing. We assumed the chaos was a failure of security. But as the lights went out in the stadium, the realization hit. The chaos wasn't an accident. It was the product. She didn't come back to win a fake fight. She came back to remind the world that, in an era of perfectly curated content, algorithmic entertainment, and sanitized corporate storytelling, the only thing that truly matters is the unpredictable. The WWE didn't lose control. They were reminded that they never had it. The fans didn't rush the barricade out of disrespect. They rushed it because they were starving for something real. The final image of the video should be the stickman figure of the woman, standing alone in the center of the ring, but zooming out until she is just a speck of light. The narration softens. She appeared, and the system broke. And in that breakage, in that panic, in that beautiful disaster, we remembered why we watch. We don't watch for the script. We watch for the moment the script burns. She didn't just return to the ring. She returned life to the machine and the shockwave. That was just the sound of the world's heart starting to beat again.